Imagine spending your whole life invisible, smelling of bleach, crushed by a debt you can never repay. You are nothing, until the day you walk into the darkest cell in the city and tell the monster chained there to sit. And he listens. Welcome back to the world of Elsa and Sylas. In part 1, a lowly scrubber tamed a primordial alpha with nothing but grit and a stolen sandwich. They broke out of their cage, but freedom is terrifying. Part 2 isn't about survival anymore. It's about war. The leash is completely off, the city is hunting them down, and the touch her and die energy is about to go nuclear. They aren't hiding in the dark anymore, they're coming for the throne. Before we unleash the alpha, please mash that like button, subscribe to @Linus Romantasy Collection so you don't miss a beat of the action, and drop a comment below telling me where in the world you are listening from tonight. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The Throne of Wires. The throne was uncomfortable, which Elsa supposed was the point. It wasn't made of gold or velvet. It was a scavenged pilot's seat from a downed city dropship, welded atop a dais of twisted rebar and concrete. It smelled of ozone and old oil. Elsa Krell shifted her weight, the heavy polymer coat slipping over her shoulders. 6 months. It had been 6 months since she had stopped scrubbing floors and started scrubbing the minds of men who refused to listen. "We are down to half rations on protein paste, Your Majesty," Benny said, scrolling through a datapad that was more cracked glass than screen. He stood at the base of the dais, looking exhausted. His usually crisp vest was stained with engine grease. The refugees from Sector 4 brought 3 distinct things: lice, appetite, and bad attitudes. "Don't call me that, Benny," Elsa sighed, rubbing her temples. A dull throb sat behind her eyes, a permanent resident since she'd taken the Spire. "I'm not a majesty. I'm a glorified camp counselor with a terrifying boyfriend." "Technically," Benny countered, pointing a stylus at her, "you are the terrifying one. Sylas just rips people in half. You rewrite their brains. That makes you the queen. And the queen needs to decide. Do we cut rations, or do we raid the southern depots?" Elsa looked to the corner of the command deck. There, sitting innocuously in the shadows of the high-tech fortress, was a yellow plastic mop bucket. It was chipped, the wheels were wonky, and the water inside was long dry. Benny had dragged it up here the day they won the war. "Humility," he'd said, "lest you forget the smell of bleach." "No raiding," Elsa said, her voice firming up. "Not yet. We trade with the scrappers, offer them charged batteries in exchange for synthesized meat. My energy output is high enough this week to fill 100 cells." "Your energy output," Benny muttered, "is going to turn your neurons into soup if you don't sleep." A low, vibrating thrum resonated through the floorboards. It wasn't machinery, it was a growl. The heavy blast doors at the far end of the command deck hissed open. Sylas Vane walked in, and the air in the room instantly felt heavier, charged with the static of a thunderstorm about to break. He was shirtless, sweat gleaming on the hard planes of his chest, his skin marked by old scars and new soot. He wiped blood from his knuckles with a rag. "The new guards," Sylas grunted, tossing the bloody rag onto a console. "They are soft. They break too easily." Elsa stood, the motion making her vision swim for a fraction of a second before she locked her knees. "Sylas, we talked about this. Training, not maiming." Sylas stalked toward the throne, his movement predatory, like a wolf circling a wounded deer. His eyes, burning with that familiar violet bioluminescence, narrowed as he looked at her. He ignored Benny entirely. He stepped up the dais, towering over her, and placed a large, callous hand against her cheek. "You smell like copper," he rumbled, his voice a low vibration that Elsa felt in her chest. "You are overextending." "I'm leading," she corrected, leaning into his touch despite herself. The bond between them, the psychic tether that linked the conduit to the alpha, pulsed warm and violet in the back of her mind. It was the only thing that kept the headache at bay. "Did you break any bones today?" "Only 3, Sylas said, his thumb stroking her jawline. They hesitated. Hesitation is death in the waste. I am teaching them to live. You're teaching them to fear you, Elsa whispered. Good, Sylas replied, his eyes darkening. Let them fear the king, as long as they worship the queen. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. The contact sent a jolt of raw power through her, violet light flickering in the air around them. Rest, Elsa, or I will carry you to the barracks and sit on you until you sleep. Is that a threat? She managed a weak smile. It is a promise. Benny cleared his throat loudly. As touching as this alpha posturing is, we have a situation. Perimeter sensors just picked up dust trails. Big ones. Sylas turned, the tenderness vanishing instantly. The monster was back. Enemies? Tribute, Elsa said, straightening her coat. Or a challenge. Chapter 2. The Tribute. The Iron Spire was a fortress of black metal jutting out of the red wasteland, a monument to war. Now, it was a sanctuary, but the walls still remembered violence. Elsa stood on the ramparts, the wind whipping her hair across her face. Below, in the dust-choked valley, a convoy of jagged vehicles revved their engines. They were scavengers, rust raiders by the look of the spikes welded to their hoods. Open the gate! A voice amplified by a loudspeaker boomed from the lead truck. Surrender the batteries or we strip the flesh from your bones. Sylas stood beside Elsa, his hands gripping the railing so hard the metal groaned and warped. His alpha energy was spiking, a dark gravity that made small pebbles around his boots float into the air. I will go down, Sylas said, his voice void of emotion. I will tear the engines out. Then I will tear the drivers out. No, Elsa said. She felt the surge of his bloodlust through the bond, a hot, metallic taste in her mouth. It was seductive, the urge to simply destroy. But she couldn't govern a kingdom of corpses. We need people, Sylas, not bodies. They disrespect you, Sylas snarled, his eyes glowing brighter. They threaten what is mine. Then let me handle it. Elsa stepped back from the edge. Benny, open the main gate. Let them into the courtyard. Benny looked pale. Elsa, there are 50 of them, armed with pulse rifles. Do it. The massive gears ground together and the gates groaned open. The rust raiders roared inside, whooping and cheering, thinking they had intimidated the spire into submission. They circled the courtyard, dust billowing, weapons raised. Elsa walked out of the lift and into the center of the courtyard. Sylas was a shadow at her back, a silent, terrifying promise of violence, but he held his ground. The lead vehicle, a monstrosity covered in buzzsaws, skid to a halt. A man with a metal jaw hopped out, leveling a rifle at Elsa. Look at this, the raider laughed. The Queen of Bone is just a little girl. Elsa didn't blink. She reached into the well of power inside her, not just hers, but the ocean of energy she could draw from Sylas. She felt him yield it to her, a flood of violet lightning that crackled under her skin. Her eyes flared with purple light. She didn't shout, she didn't need to, she used the voice. Kneel. The word wasn't just sound, it was a psychic hammer. It rippled through the air, visible as a distortion wave. The raiders didn't have a choice. Synapses misfired. Muscles obeyed a command that overrode their own conscious thought. 50 armed men dropped to their knees in unison, weapons clattering to the concrete. The man with the metal jaw looked terrified, his body locked in a rigid bow, veins bulging in his neck as he tried to fight it. Elsa walked forward, the violet electricity arcing between her fingers. She stopped in front of the leader. She could crush his mind. She could turn him into a vegetable. Instead, she released the pressure just enough to let him speak. You came for batteries? Elsa asked, her voice echoing unnaturally. You came for power? I am the power. She gestured to Sylas. He stepped forward, picked up the lead truck by its bumper with one hand, and flipped it over. The crash shook the ground. You have 2 choices, Elsa said to the kneeling army. You can leave, on foot, and die in the wastes. Or you can pledge those guns to the spire, eat hot food, and live under my protection." The leader looked at his overturned truck, then at the glowing monster standing beside the small woman. "We serve," the leader gasped. "We serve the queen." Elsa exhaled, the violet light fading from her eyes. Her knees trembled just once. Sylas was there instantly, his hand on the small of her back, holding her up. "Show off," he whispered into her ear. "Shut up," she murmured back, "and get them some soup." Chapter 3. Night Terrors. The scream shattered the silence of the royal quarters. Elsa woke instantly, heart hammering. She wasn't in the scrubber dorms anymore. She was in the captain's lush bed, draped in silk sheets scavenged from the city. But the luxury meant nothing when the man beside her was fighting a war in his sleep. Sylas was thrashing, his movements blurring with supernatural speed. He wasn't just tossing, he was fighting. A fist flew out, smashing the heavy oak nightstand into splinters. "No," he roared, his voice guttural, feral. Get back to the cage." He was hallucinating. The PTSD from 20 years of torture in Kaelen's labs didn't care that he was free. In his mind, he was still strapped to the chair, still being cut open. "Sylas!" Elsa scrambled up, dodging a flailing arm that could have decapitated her. He was glowing, gravity in the room was warping, the shards of the nightstand were floating in mid-air, spinning around him like a deadly orbit. His eyes were wide open, but he wasn't seeing her. He was seeing the scientists. Elsa dove forward, grabbing his face with both hands. His skin was burning hot. "Sylas, look at me," she commanded, pushing a pulse of dampening energy into him. It was the opposite of the lightning. It was a cool blue wave meant to soothe. He snarled, grabbing her wrists. His grip was bruising. For a second, the alpha took over completely. He didn't recognize her. He raised a hand to strike. "Sylas," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's Elsa. It's your mate." The word mate pierced through the red haze. He froze. The violet fire in his eyes flickered, struggling against the feral silver. "Elsa." The name was a ragged gasp. "I'm here. You're in the spire. You're safe." She pushed more calming energy into him, ignoring the sharp stab of pain in her own temples. It felt like siphoning poison out of a wound with her mouth. The gravity field collapsed. The wood splinters rained down onto the bed. Sylas slumped forward, burying his face in her stomach, his massive body shaking with tremors. "I saw them," he choked out, his voice small, so incredibly small for a creature capable of crushing tanks. "I saw the needles. I couldn't move. I couldn't protect you." "I'm right here." Elsa stroked his sweat-dampened hair. She looked at her wrists. Distinct red handprints were already forming where he had grabbed her. She pulled the sheet up to cover them before he could see. "You were dreaming." Sylas pulled back, his eyes scanning her frantically. He saw the fear she tried to hide. He saw the exhaustion etched under her eyes. "I am a danger," he whispered, pulling away to the edge of the bed. He put his head in his hands. "I am broken, Elsa. You cannot fix a weapon." "I don't want to fix you," she said softly, crawling across the mattress to wrap her arms around his scarred back. "I just want to hold you." He stiffened, then slowly relaxed, leaning back into her warmth. But Elsa stared at the wall, her vision blurring. The effort of dampening his panic had drained her. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. "We need to sleep," she lied. "Yes," he said, though neither of them closed their eyes for a long time. Chapter 4. The Static. The morning sun over the wasteland was usually a harsh orange, but today the sky looked bruised. Elsa was in the mess hall, forcing herself to eat a bowl of gray protein mush. The refugees were eating quietly, casting awe-struck glances at her. She ignored them, focusing on keeping her spoon steady. Benny sat across from her, tinkering with a portable radio. "I'm telling you, the atmospheric interference is weird. Long-range comms are down. It's just static." "Maybe a solar flare?" Elsa suggested, taking a sip of water. Maybe, Benny frowned, but solar flares don't usually broadcast on a looping frequency. Suddenly, the air pressure in the room dropped. It wasn't a gradual shift, it was a violent vacuum, like the air being sucked out of an airlock. Then came the sound. It wasn't a noise heard with the ears, it was a high-pitched screech that bypassed the eardrums and drilled directly into the brainstem. Ah, Benny flinched, rubbing his ear. That's annoying. But for the alphas, it was agony. Across the mess hall, 3 of the tamed feral alphas that served as guards screamed. They dropped their trays, clutching their heads, clawing at their scalps. Elsa gasped, dropping her spoon. A spike of white-hot pain lanced through her skull. Not her pain, but his. Sylas, she breathed. The double doors of the mess hall blew off their hinges. Sylas stumbled in. He wasn't walking, he was staggering, crashing into tables. Blood was streaming from his nose, dripping down his chin and chest. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown out, the violet light strobing erratically.
Make it stop!
He roared, the sound shattering the glass of the serving station.
Make it stop!
Sylas! Elsa ran to him. As she got close, the frequency hit her through the bond, buckling her knees. It felt like someone was scraping a knife against the inside of her skull. Get everyone out! Elsa screamed at Benny. Clear the hall! Benny scrambled, ushering the terrified refugees out the back. Elsa reached Sylas. He was on his knees, his hands pressed over his ears, his forehead resting on the floor. The concrete beneath him was cracking from the sheer pressure of his telekinetic field lashing out in pain. I can hear it, he gasped, spitting blood. A voice, not a voice, a signal. It commands. What does it say? Elsa gripped his shoulders, trying to anchor him, trying to use her dampening to shield his mind, but the static was too strong. Sylas looked up at her. His eyes were bleeding tears of violet energy. It says, purge. Elsa looked around. The other alphas in the room were writhing on the floor. The omegas and betas, the humans, were merely uncomfortable, hearing only a high whine. It's a weapon. Elsa realized, terror cold in her gut. It targets the alpha gene. Sylas let out a guttural cry, his back arching. Elsa, run. I can't hold the wall. No. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. Focus on me. Focus on the bond. I am your wall. She poured everything she had into him. She built a psychic fortress around his mind, brick by brick, blocking out the screaming static. Sylas slumped against her, the tension draining out of him as her shield took hold. The nosebleed slowed, but Elsa felt a warm wetness on her own upper lip. She wiped it away. It was blood. Chapter 5, The Scout. The static stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving a ringing silence in the spire. It was a test, Benny said an hour later. They were on the upper observation deck. Benny had dismantled a drone that the perimeter guards had shot down during the chaos. The drone didn't look like city tech. It was jagged, black, and ugly. It looked like a flying coffin. The frequency came from this? Elsa asked. She was leaning heavily against a crate. She had cleaned the blood from her face, but she felt hollowed out. It's a relay, Benny said, pulling out a bundle of wires. It wasn't generating the signal, it was boosting it, like a repeater tower. Sylas stood by the window, staring out at the screen. He was silent, brooding. He hadn't touched Elsa since the attack. He was keeping his distance, afraid that if the signal returned, he might hurt her. Where's the source? Sylas asked, his voice rough. I traced the triangulation. Benny tapped a map on the wall. It's coming from the screaming canyons, deep in the fissures. If there's one relay here, there are probably a dozen more chaining the signal all the way from the city. It was a rage signal, Elsa said quietly. I felt it in your mind, Sylas. It wasn't just pain. It was an order to kill, to revert. Sylas turned. If they turn it on full strength, every alpha in the Wasteland will go feral, including me. We have to destroy it, Elsa said. I will go, Sylas said immediately. I will go to the canyons and burn it out. We will go, Elsa corrected. No. Sylas stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. You are weak. You are bleeding, Elsa. You cannot handle the wastes right now. And you can? Elsa shot back. You almost leveled the mess hall. If that signal hits you again when you're out there alone, who brings you back? Who stops you from tearing the world apart? Sylas clenched his jaw. He knew she was right. That was the tragedy of their existence. He was the engine, but she was the steering wheel. Without her, he was just a crash waiting to happen. I can't let you get hurt, he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous soft rumble. Then protect me, she challenged. But I'm going. You break things, Sylas. I fix them. That's the deal. Sylas looked at Benny. Get the rover ready. The armored one. Benny saluted nervously. I'll pack extra snacks. And maybe some handcuffs? Just in case? Sylas growled. Benny ran. Elsa walked up to Sylas. She reached out, taking his large hand in hers. He flinched, then squeezed it gently. The city thinks we're hiding, Elsa said, looking at the black smoke rising from the drone's circuitry. They think we're afraid. They should hope we are afraid, Sylas said, his eyes flashing with that deep, violet warning. Because when I am not afraid, I am hungry. Let's go hunting, Elsa said. Chapter 6. The Outbreak. The silence following the drone analysis didn't last long. It was broken not by a siren, but by a collective, guttural roar that shook the very foundations of the Iron Spire. Elsa was halfway to the infirmary, intending to ask for something for her splitting headache, when the floor lurched. Sector 4! Benny's voice crackled over the emergency comms, shrill with panic. The barracks! The signal is back, and it's louder! Elsa grabbed the wall to steady herself. The hum was back in her skull, a persistent hornet's nest of static, but down in the barracks where the density of alphas was highest, it must have been deafening. Sylas! She yelled into her comm. Stay back! His voice was a snarl, distorted by the same rage bleeding through their bond. Do not come down here! Elsa ignored him. She hit the lift override, sending the cage plummeting toward the lower levels. When the doors hissed open, the air smelled of unwashed bodies, fear, and blood. The refugee barracks were a war zone. The 50 Rust Raiders they had recruited earlier were tearing into the general population. But it wasn't just them. Even the mild-mannered laborers who carried the alpha gene were frothing at the mouth, eyes rolled back, swinging pipes and fists with feral abandonment. In the center of the chaos was Sylas. He was a blur of motion, a dark anchor in the storm. A massive raider with a crowbar lunged at a cowering family. Sylas intercepted him, catching the crowbar mid-swing. With a roar that drowned out the riot, Sylas ripped the bar from the man's hands and bent it into a pretzel. He grabbed the raider by the throat, lifting him off the ground. The violet light in Sylas's eyes was flickering dangerously fast, strobe lighting between the calm of the king and the madness of the signal. Don't kill him, Elsa whispered, projecting the thought through the bond. The effort made her vision blur. Sylas, hold. Sylas's hand tightened. The raider gagged. Sylas wanted to squeeze. He wanted to pop the threat like a grape. That was the instinct the signal amplified. Purge, kill, cleanse. Sleep. Sylas gritted out instead. He slammed the man into the concrete floor, hard enough to knock him unconscious, but not hard enough to kill. Elsa stepped out of the lift. A feral alpha spotted her. He was young, barely 16, a kid she'd given extra rations to yesterday. Now he screeched like a banshee and charged her. Elsa raised a trembling hand. She didn't have the strength for a mass command. She had to be surgical. Stop! The word hit the boy like a physical wall. He crumpled, sliding to a halt at her feet, but the exertion cost her. A fresh trickle of blood ran from her nose, warm and metallic. Elsa! Sylas saw her. Distracted, he took a heavy blow to the kidneys from a pipe-wielding mechanic. He didn't even flinch. He spun, backhanding the mechanic into a row of lockers. I told you to stay back! Sylas roared, fighting his way toward her, tossing bodies aside like rag dolls. I can't let you do this alone! She shouted back, wiping her face. "They are lost!" Sylas grabbed 2 men by their collars and smashed their heads together. "The signal owns them." "Then we break the signal." Elsa pressed her back against his. "Benny, where is it coming from?" "Triangulation confirmed," Benny yelled in her ear. "It's the Screaming Canyons, Relay Station Delta." Sylas turned to her, his chest heaving, his skin radiating a terrifying amount of heat. "We leave, now, before I kill them all." Chapter 7. The Source. The aftermath was a symphony of groans. The infirmary was overflowing. Miraculously, there were no fatalities, though there were enough broken bones to keep the medics busy for a month. In the hangar bay, the mood was grim. Benny was frantically welding a reinforced plate onto the side of the rover, a 6-wheeled beast designed for deep desert traversal. "The signal is intermittent," Benny said, lifting his welding mask. "It pulses. If you catch a pulse while you're in the canyons, well, the acoustics alone will scramble your brains." Elsa sat on a crate, sipping water that tasted like iodine. Her hands were still shaking. She hid them in the pockets of her oversized coat. "I am going alone," Sylas announced. He was loading ammunition into a kinetic rifle, not for him, but for the rover's turret. "It is too dangerous for you, Elsa. You stumbled in the barracks." "I tripped," she lied. "You are weak." Sylas stopped loading the gun and turned to her. His gaze was intense, scanning her for injuries. "Your energy signature is fluctuating. It feels crowded." Elsa's heart skipped a beat. Crowded. Did he know? No, he would have said something more specific. He just sensed the turbulence in her biology. "I'm going, Sylas." She stood up, forcing her legs to lock. "You said it yourself. The signal makes you want to purge. If you go into the canyons alone and that frequency hits you, you won't come back. You'll become the monster Kaelen wants you to be." Sylas flinched. It was a low blow, but necessary. "And what will you do?" Sylas stepped closer, towering over her. "You can barely stand." "I am your anchor," Elsa said, reaching up to touch the heavy collar of his tactical vest. "You break things. I fix them. I keep you sane. You keep me alive. That's the deal." Sylas stared at her, the conflict warring behind his eyes. He hated endangering her, but he feared losing himself even more. He looked at her wrists, where the faint bruises from his night terror still lingered. He traced one gently with a gloved thumb. "If we encounter resistance," Sylas said, his voice dropping to a low rumble, "you stay in the rover. You do not engage. You do not use the voice unless I am dead." "Deal," Elsa said. "Benny," Sylas barked, not looking away from Elsa. "Is the vehicle ready?" "Fueled, armored, and stocked with those nutrient bars that taste like wet cardboard." Benny saluted. "Try not to drive it off a cliff. It's the last one with working AC." Sylas opened the passenger door for Elsa. He didn't just help her in, he practically lifted her, treating her like she was made of glass. "To the canyons." Sylas grunted, climbing into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, a mechanical beast ready to charge into the wasteland. Chapter 8. Into the Wastes. The Screaming Canyons were aptly named. Even inside the sealed, armored cab of the rover, the wind howled like a dying animal. The landscape was a nightmare of jagged red rock and twisting fissures that seemed to go down forever. It had been 4 hours of tense driving. The cramped cabin forced a proximity that was both comforting and suffocating. Elsa watched Sylas drive. His knuckles were white on the steering yoke. Every muscle in his body was coiled tight, waiting for an attack, waiting for the signal. The tension inside the rover was thicker than the dust storm outside. "You're thinking too loud," Elsa murmured, shifting in her seat. The leather creaked. "I am thinking about Kaelen," Sylas said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "I am thinking about how slow I will pull his head from his shoulders." "Focus on the road, big guy." Elsa reached out, placing her hand on his thigh. The contact made him jump slightly. He glanced at her, and the violet in his eyes softened. He put the rover on autopilot. Risky in this terrain, but the road was straight for the next few miles. He turned in his seat, the limited space forcing his knees to bump against hers. "You are in pain." "I'm fine," she deflected. "Just tired." "Liar." Sylas leaned forward, unbuckling his harness. He closed the distance between them, crowding her into the corner of the passenger seat. The air in the cabin suddenly felt very hot. "I can feel your anxiety. It tastes like ash." "And your fear tastes like ozone," she whispered. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. He trailed off, his hands gripping her waist, pulling her as close as the center console would allow. "I know," Elsa said. She knew what he needed. He needed to feel alive. He needed to verify that she was real, that he hadn't destroyed her in a dream. He kissed her, and it wasn't gentle. It was desperate. It was a claiming. His lips were rough, his stubble grazing her skin. Elsa responded instantly, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. The bond flared between them, not violet lightning this time, but a warm, golden pulse of shared sensation. For a moment, the war didn't exist. Kaelen didn't exist. There was only the heat of his skin, the weight of his body pressing her into the seat, and the desperate rhythm of their breathing. Sylas broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers, breathing heavily. His hand rested flat on her stomach. Elsa froze. "You are warm here," he murmured, distracted by the sensation of life, though he didn't recognize it yet. "So warm." "Sylas," she breathed, her voice shaky. He pulled back, his eyes clearing. The feral edge was gone, replaced by a fierce, possessive clarity. He kissed her nose, a surprisingly tender gesture from a man who could crush a tank. "We are close," he said, buckling himself back in. The moment was over, but the air was lighter. "I see the markers." Elsa looked out the viewport. Ahead, nestled between two massive spires of rock, was a metallic structure. The relay station. Chapter 9. The Canyon Trap. They parked the rover a mile out, tucked behind a wind-eroded ridge. The wind here was deafening, stripping the sound of their approach. "Stay behind me," Sylas commanded. They moved on foot toward the station. It was a brutalist block of concrete and steel, bristling with antennas. But it wasn't the architecture that made Elsa's blood run cold. It was the guards. They weren't human. They stood perfectly still in the gale, their metallic limbs gleaming. They wore the city's crest, but their faces were smooth, featureless plates of glass. "Hunters," Sylas hissed, pulling Elsa down behind a boulder. "Cyborgs, no brain to command, only code." Elsa's stomach dropped. Her greatest weapon, the voice, was useless here. She was just a woman with a headache and a small pistol Benny had given her. "I will draw their fire," Sylas said. "You flank right, aim for the joints, the knees and the neck." "Sylas, there are 6 of them." "I have handled worse." Before she could argue, Sylas vaulted over the rock. He didn't sneak, he announced himself. He slammed his fists into the ground, sending a shockwave of gravity through the shale. "Come and get me!" The hunters activated instantly, their glass faces lit up red. They moved with terrifying, jerky speed, raising arm cannons that whined with charging energy. Sylas was a whirlwind. He caught a plasma bolt with his bare hand, the energy sizzling against his skin, and hurled it back. He closed the distance on the first hunter, tearing its arm off with a screech of tearing metal. But they were fast. 2 hunters flanked him, firing grappling cables. The hooks dug into Sylas's shoulders. He roared, not in pain, but in fury. Elsa broke cover. She aimed her pistol, her hands shaking. "Breathe, be the knife." She fired. The bullet sparked harmlessly off a hunter's chest plate. The hunter turned its faceless head toward her. It designated a new target. "No," Sylas bellowed. He yanked on the cables, dragging the 2 hunters attached to him off their feet. He used them as flails, smashing them into each other. The hunter targeting Elsa charged. She tried to run, but her legs felt like lead. She stumbled, falling hard onto the sharp rocks. The machine loomed over her, its arm cannon glowing blue. Elsa screamed, instinctively throwing up a hand. She tried to push it with telekinesis, but her power sputtered and died. She was empty. A shadow eclipsed the sun. Sylas landed on the hunter from above. He didn't just land, he crashed like a meteor. He drove the machine into the ground, shattering its chassis. He ripped the head unit clean off, wires sparking and flailing. He stood up, panting, ichor and oil dripping from his hands. He looked at Elsa, his eyes wide with panic. "Did they touch you?" he demanded, rushing to her. "I'm fine," she gasped, though her knee was bleeding. "You got them." "I almost didn't," Sylas snarled, looking at the wreckage. "You were helpless. I hate it." "Then let's finish this," she said, "so we don't have to do it again." Chapter 10. The Message. The inside of the station was cold and sterile, a jarring contrast to the red dust outside. They moved quickly, Sylas kicking open blast doors, checking corners. They reached the central control room. A massive console hummed in the center, surrounded by screens displaying complex waveforms. "That's the signal," Elsa said, pointing to a looping red wave on the main monitor. "It's on standby." "Smash it," Sylas ordered. He raised a fist, preparing to crush the console with gravity. "Wait." Elsa saw a flashing light. "There's a message waiting, addressed to Subject 0. Sylas froze. "Subject 0, that was my designation." Elsa hit the play button. A hologram flickered to life above the console. It was a man in a pristine white lab coat. He was older, with silver hair and eyes that looked like chips of ice. Director Kaelen. "Hello, Sylas," the hologram said. The voice was smooth, cultured, and terrifyingly familiar. Sylas growled, a low vibration in his chest. He stepped forward as if to strangle the light. "If you are seeing this," Kaelen continued, pacing within the projection, "it means you have destroyed my relay. Predictable. You always were a blunt instrument." Kaelen paused, looking directly at the camera as if seeing them. "You think you are free, but you are obsolete. You were a prototype, Sylas, flawed. Too much emotion, too much self." Elsa stepped closer to Sylas, gripping his arm. He was vibrating with rage. "I have perfected the design." Kaelen smiled, a cold, thin expression. "Subject 1 is awake. He has your power, but none of your defiance. He is pure obedience. Enjoy your little kingdom in the Wasteland, Subject 0, while it lasts." The hologram flickered and died. "Subject 1, Sylas whispered. The name hung in the air like a curse. "He's baiting you," Elsa said urgently. "He wants you to come to the city. It's a trap." "It doesn't matter," Sylas said. He looked at the console. With a roar of frustration, he unleashed a pulse of gravity. The console imploded. Sparks showered the room as the machinery crumpled into a ball of scrap metal. The red waveform on the screens vanished. The signal was dead. "The signal is gone," Sylas said, turning to Elsa. "But the threat is not." "We go back to the Spire," Elsa said, tugging on his arm. "We regroup. We plan." "We prepare for war," Sylas corrected. "He is building a replacement. I will not let him." As they walked out of the smoking station, the ground trembled beneath them, not from an earthquake, but from the explosion of the station's power core behind them. They didn't look back, but as Elsa climbed into the rover, a wave of nausea hit her so hard she nearly doubled over. She clutched her stomach, squeezed her eyes shut, and waited for it to pass. "Elsa?" Sylas asked, pausing at the driver's door. "Just the adrenaline crash," she managed to say, forcing a smile. But as she strapped herself in, she knew it was more than that. The secret inside her was growing, and the world was getting much, much more dangerous. Chapter 11. The Fever. The journey back to the Iron Spire was a blur of red dust and black consciousness. Elsa sat in the passenger seat of the armored rover, her head lolling against the vibration of the window. Every bump in the road sent a wave of nausea rolling through her gut, a sickness so profound it felt like her insides were trying to turn themselves inside out. She clutched her stomach, her fingers digging into the heavy polymer of her coat. Her knee, torn open by the rocks in the canyons, throbbed in time with the engine's roar. But the physical pain was distant, muted by the terrifying silence in her mind. The conduit, the psychic channel that usually hummed with the ambient energy of the world, was dead. It felt like a limb had been amputated. Sylas drove in silence. His shoulders, bandaged hastily with a medkit torn from the dashboard, were stiff. The grappling hooks had done damage, but he ignored it, his eyes fixed on the horizon with a grim intensity that frightened her more than his rage. He wasn't angry, he was haunted. Obsolete. The word hung in the cabin like smoke. "We're here." Sylas's voice was gravel, pulling her from a fever dream. The massive blast doors of the spire rolled open. As the rover crunched into the hangar bay, Elsa reached for the door handle. Her fingers fumbled, numb and unresponsive. "I've got it," she mumbled, trying to sound like a queen. "I'm fine." She pushed the door open and swung her legs out. Her boots hit the concrete, but her legs didn't get the memo to hold her up. The world tilted violently to the left. The ground rushed up to meet her face. She never hit the floor. Sylas was there, moving with that terrifying speed, catching her before she slumped. "Elsa!" His voice cracked. "Benny!" Sylas roared, the sound echoing off the metal rafters like a gunshot. "Get the medics, now!" The next hour was a kaleidoscope of ceiling lights and urgent voices. When the world finally stopped spinning, Elsa found herself in the infirmary. The air smelled of antiseptic and ozone. She was hooked up to 3 different monitors, all of them beeping in an erratic, angry rhythm. Dr. Wells, a grim-faced woman who had defected from the city years ago, was adjusting a drip line. Sylas stood in the corner, his back pressed into the shadows, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked like a statue of regret. "Your Majesty," Dr. Wells said, her tone sharp, "you are lucky your brain didn't melt out of your ears." "Headache," Elsa croaked. Her throat felt like she'd swallowed glass. "It's not a headache, it's neural burnout," Wells snapped, tapping the monitor. "You are a conduit, you channel energy, but your body is biological, not mechanical. You've been pushing gigajoules of alpha energy through a nervous system designed to handle millivolts. You are over-conducting." "I have to," Elsa argued weakly, trying to sit up but failing. Sylas needs a partner, not a corpse," Wells cut her off. She glanced at the king in the corner. "If she channels high-level energy again in this state, her neural pathways will fuse. She will be lobotomized. Do you understand?" Sylas flinched. The shadows around him seemed to deepen, reacting to his distress. "She will not channel," he said, his voice hollow. "I will not let her." "Good," Wells sighed. "She needs rest, total isolation from stress, and fluids. Her electrolyte levels are catastrophic." Elsa looked at Sylas. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He was staring at her hands, the hands that had failed to stop the hunter. He was blaming himself. He was seeing Subject 1, the perfect machine, and comparing it to her, the broken human. "Sylas," she whispered. He turned and walked out of the infirmary without a word. Chapter 12. The Spy. Elsa lasted exactly 4 hours in bed before the anxiety became worse than the fever. She was sitting up, sipping a nutrient shake that tasted like chalk, when Benny burst into the infirmary. He didn't look like his usual frantic self. He looked dangerous. He was holding a datapad in one hand and a heavy wrench in the other. "Benny," Elsa asked, putting the shake down. "Did the generator blow again?" "I wish," Benny muttered. He pulled a chair over, scraping it loudly against the floor. "Remember that drone? The one that was boosting the signal?" "Hard to forget," Elsa rubbed her temple. "I cracked its encryption logs while you were sleeping," Benny said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "That drone wasn't just receiving a signal from the canyons, it was sending one out. From here, from inside the spire." Elsa went cold. "A beacon?" "A mole," Benny corrected. "Someone has been broadcasting our patrol routes, our ration levels, and your medical status. Kaelen knew you were weak before you even left for the canyons." "Who?" Elsa demanded, swinging her legs off the bed. The room spun, but she gritted her teeth and waited for it to settle. "I traced the transmission signature to the secondary barracks," Benny said. "It's one of the scrappers we picked up last month. Guy named Roker, works in sanitation." "Get Sylas," Elsa ordered, grabbing her coat from the rack. She swayed, grabbing the IV pole for support. "Elsa, no!" Benny stood up, blocking her path. "The doc said you need to be a vegetable for a week. Sylas he's in the holding cells already. He's interviewing the suspect." "Oh, God." Elsa paled. "If Sylas is in a mood, there won't be a suspect left to interrogate. Help me walk, Benny." "I really shouldn't." Benny grimaced, but he offered her his arm. They moved slowly through the corridors. The spire felt different today, quieter, tenser. The refugees knew something was wrong. They watched the Queen limp by, whispering behind their hands. When they reached the brig, the screams had already stopped. That was usually a bad sign. Elsa punched in the door code. The heavy steel slid back. Sylas was standing over a man tied to a metal chair. Roker, the sanitation worker, looked surprisingly intact, though he was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. Sylas wasn't hitting him, he was just looking at him. He was using the alpha stare, a predator locking eyes with prey, broadcasting pure, primal terror directly into the man's amygdala. "He is not speaking," Sylas said without turning around. He sounded bored. "He is waiting for a lawyer. I told him we ate the lawyers." "Roker," Elsa said, stepping into the room. She leaned heavily against the doorframe. "You sent the data. We have the logs. Don't waste my time. I'm sick and I'm cranky." Roker looked up, sweat dripping from his nose. "I didn't have a choice. They have my sister. In the city. Kaelen said if I updated him, he'd move her to the Alpha District. He'd make her a citizen." "What did you tell him?" Sylas leaned in, his shadow engulfing the man. "Everything," Roker wept. "But mostly about the project. He wanted to know if you suspected." "Suspected what?" Elsa asked sharp. "Project Chimera," Roker whispered. "The Godmaker." Chapter 13. Project Chimera. The revelation hung in the damp air of the brig, heavier than the smell of rust and fear. "Godmaker." Sylas repeated the word, tasting it like poison. He grabbed the back of Roker's chair, the metal groaning under his grip. "Speak clearly." Roker squeezed his eyes shut. "Director Kaelen, he's not just building robots, he's splicing. He found the original source code, the DNA of the primordial alpha." Elsa felt a chill that had nothing to do with her fever. "Sylas's DNA?" "Yes," Roker gasped. "But he's stripping it. He calls it cleaning the slate. He says natural alphas are flawed because they have human memories, human traumas. He's growing Subject 1 in a vat. It has all the power of a primordial, but no soul, no conscience. It doesn't feel pain. It doesn't feel fear." Sylas released the chair and walked to the far wall. He punched it. The impact didn't just dent the metal. It buckled the reinforced steel plate, sending a spiderweb of cracks through the concrete behind it. "A shell," Sylas snarled, his back to them. "He is making a shell." "He says it's the future," Roker babbled, eager to please now. "He says Subject 1 will lead the new world. It will command all alphas, and they will obey because its signal is pure. It has no static." No static. Elsa realized what that meant. Sylas struggled with control because he was constantly fighting his own mind, his own past. A creature without a mind wouldn't struggle. It would be a perfect conductor. "Where is it?" Elsa asked. "Where is the lab?" "The Lab of Echoes," Roker said. "Sector 1, deep underground. But you can't get there. The city is locking down. They're preparing for the launch." "Launch?" Benny asked from the doorway. "In 3 days," Roker said. "Subject 1 wakes up in 3 days." Sylas turned around. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes were haunted. He looked at Elsa, and for the first time she saw true fear in him. Not fear of death, but fear of replacement. He was the monster. If there was a better monster, what was he? "Get him out of my sight," Sylas ordered, gesturing to Roker. "Put him in the lower levels. If he speaks to anyone, throw him off the spire." Benny scrambled to untie the prisoner, dragging the sobbing man out of the room. Elsa and Sylas were left alone. 3 days, Elsa whispered. "We can't fight a primordial, Sylas. Not with me like this, and not with you." "Not with me broken," Sylas finished for her. He looked at his hands, watching the violet energy flicker under his skin. "Kaelen is right. I am cluttered. I hesitate." "You have a conscience," Elsa argued, pushing herself off the wall to go to him. "That's not a flaw." "It is in war," Sylas said. He looked at her, his expression hardening into something brittle. "You cannot use your powers, Elsa. The doctor said it will kill you. If we go to the city, you are defenseless." "I have a gun," she tried to joke, but it fell flat. "A gun is a toy to a hunter," Sylas said. "If you were to survive this, you must learn to be dangerous without the magic. You must learn to kill with your hands." "Sylas, I'm barely standing." "Then we start tomorrow," he said, tone final. "You rest tonight. Tomorrow, I teach you how to survive me." Chapter 14. The Training. The training mats in the barracks were usually reserved for the guards, but Sylas had cleared the room. He didn't want an audience for this. Elsa stood in the center of the mat, wearing loose fatigues. She felt better than yesterday. The nausea had subsided to a dull ache, and the dizziness was manageable as long as she didn't turn her head too fast. But she felt small. Without the hum of the conduit in her mind, she felt incredibly, dangerously mortal. Sylas stood opposite her. He wasn't wearing his tactical vest, just a tight black undershirt that highlighted the terrifying density of his muscles. He held a wooden training knife. "Attack me," he said. "Sylas," Elsa sighed, shifting her stance. "I'm not going to stab you with a stick." "Attack me!" he roared, lashing out with a speed that made her gasp. The wooden blade stopped an inch from her throat. "Dead. You are dead. Again." Elsa swallowed hard. He wasn't playing. "You rely on the voice," Sylas said, circling her. "You wait for them to look at you. You wait for the connection. Subject 1 will not look at you. It will not have a mind to connect with. It will just tear you apart." He tossed the knife to her. She caught it, the wood smooth against her palm. "I am small," she said, repeating the mantra he had whispered to her once. "Use it," Sylas instructed. "You are not strong. Do not try to be strong. Be fast. Be the knife." He lunged. Elsa instinctively raised her hand to push him with telekinesis. Nothing happened. The neural pathways were blocked, silent. Panic flared in her chest. Sylas swept her legs. She hit the mat hard, the air leaving her lungs in a whoosh. Before she could wheeze, he was on top of her, pinning her wrists, his weight crushing. "You reach for the power," he accused, his face inches from hers. "It isn't there, Elsa. Stop reaching for it." "It's habit," she yelled back, struggling. "Get off me." "Make me," he growled. Elsa gritted her teeth. She couldn't push him off. He weighed 300 pounds of dense muscle. She remembered what Benny had taught her about leverage. Small joints. She stopped struggling against his chest. She went for his thumb. She grabbed the digit pinning her right wrist and bent it back, hard. Sylas hissed, his grip loosening just for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Elsa bridged her hips, bucking him forward, and rolled out from under him. She scrambled to her feet, panting, raising the wooden knife. Sylas stayed on the floor for a moment, looking at his hand. He looked up, and a rare, grim smile touched his lips. "Good," he said. "Dirty. I like it." "I learned from the best," she retorted, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Again." Sylas stood up. They went for an hour. It was brutal. He threw her. tripped her, and pinned her until her body was a map of bruises, but he also taught her. He showed her how to use his momentum against him, how to tuck into the blind spots of a larger opponent, how to strike the throat and the eyes. But as the adrenaline faded, the sickness returned. During a grapple, Elsa felt a sharp spike of heat in her abdomen. It wasn't the fever, it was the bond. Sylas was radiating so much energy during the fight, so much physical and emotional intensity that it was bleeding into her. "Stop!" she gasped, dropping the knife. She doubled over, clutching her stomach. "Elsa?" Sylas stopped mid-lunge. "It burns," she whispered. She looked at her arms. Faint violet traceries were appearing under her skin like glowing veins. "Sylas, you're too loud." He stepped back, horror dawning on his face. He looked at his own hands, which were glowing with residual alpha power. "I am poisoning you," he realized. "The bond, even without you reaching for it. My proximity is overloading you." "I'm okay," she lied, sinking to her knees. "I just need a minute." "No," Sylas said, stepping further away, backing toward the door. "You don't need a minute. You need silence." Chapter 15. The Separation. The walk back to their quarters was a silent funeral procession. Sylas didn't touch her. He walked 6 feet apart, ensuring his energy field didn't brush against hers. When they reached the door to their shared room, the only place in the spire that felt like a home, Sylas stopped. "I will stay in the barracks tonight," he said. Elsa leaned against the door frame, her body aching from the throes and the fever. "Sylas, don't be dramatic. I can handle it." "You cannot," he said, pointing at her neck. Elsa walked to the mirror in the hallway. The violet veins were creeping up her throat. It looked like an infection of light. "The doctor said you need isolation," Sylas said, his voice tight. "I am the source of the current. As long as I am near you, your body tries to conduct. It is instinct. You cannot turn it off, and neither can I." "So what?" Elsa turned to him, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. "We just stop? We sleep apart? For how long?" "Until you are healed," Sylas said, "or until the war is over." "That feels like a breakup," she said, her voice small. "It is survival," Sylas countered. He looked like he wanted to cross the distance, to pull her into him and hold her until the world went away. His hands twitched at his sides. "I cannot protect you if my very presence kills you." "Sylas, please." She stepped toward him. He stepped back. The rejection hit her harder than any physical blow. "Lock the door." "Elsa," he commanded softly. "Get some sleep." He turned and walked away, his heavy boots echoing down the metal corridor. He didn't look back. Elsa stood there for a long time, shivering. The cold wasn't from the air. It was from the sudden, absolute silence in her head. Without him near, the static was gone, but so was the warmth. She felt hollow. She went into their room and sat on the edge of the bed. It smelled like him, earth, rain, and old spice. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, rocking slightly. "Just you and me, kid," she whispered to the empty room. A sharp cramp twisted in her gut, followed by a wave of nausea that sent her rushing to the small basin in the corner. She heaved until there was nothing left. When she wiped her mouth and looked in the mirror, she saw it. The violet veins on her neck were fading now that he was gone. But her eyes looked different. The pupils were dilated, and deep within the iris there was a tiny secondary flicker, a second spark. "Creating." She remembered the doctor's words from her checkup months ago in the city, before everything went to hell. She wasn't just sick, she was changing, and she was doing it alone. Outside, the wind howled against the spire, carrying the promise of war. Elsa curled up on the bed, pulling Sylas's pillow to her chest, and wept until the exhaustion finally dragged her under. Chapter 16. The Withdrawal. The Iron Spire was freezing. Technically, the environmental systems were functioning at 90% efficiency. The ambient temperature was a comfortable 20 degrees Celsius, but Elsa Krell was shivering so hard her teeth clicked together. She sat on the edge of the bed in the captain's quarters, her quarters now that she was alone, wrapped in 3 wool blankets and Sylas's heavy coat. It didn't help. The cold wasn't on her skin, it was in her marrow. It had been 24 hours since Sylas had walked out. 24 hours of silence. Without the bond humming in the back of her mind, the world felt flat and gray. It was like going deaf after a lifetime of hearing music. She reached for a glass of water on the nightstand, her hand trembling. She knocked it over. The glass shattered. Elsa stared at the shards. She didn't have the energy to clean it up. "Just leave it," she whispered to the empty room. "Let it be broken." Down in the barracks, 10 levels below, Sylas Vane was equally miserable, though his withdrawal manifested differently. He wasn't cold. He was hollow. He sat on a bench in the locker room staring at his boots. The other guards gave him a wide berth. The air around him was heavy, suffocating. He felt like a gun with the safety off, waiting for a finger to pull the trigger. "Your Majesty?" Sylas didn't look up. It was Benny. The little man smelled of ozone and stale coffee. "Go away, Benny," Sylas rumbled. His voice sounded rusty. "I brought you food," Benny said, placing a tray on the bench. "And I brought you a report. Elsa. She's not eating." Sylas's head snapped up. His eyes were rimmed with red, the violet light dim and flickering. "Is she sick? Is the fever worse?" "She's cold, Sylas," Benny said softly. "She's freezing to death in a warm room because you're not there to regulate her temperature." "You guys are like, I don't know, quantum entangled particles. You separate them, they destabilize." "If I go to her, I burn her," Sylas said, clenching his fists until the knuckles popped. "My energy is poison to her right now. The doctor said isolation." "The doctor is a mechanic for bodies," Benny argued. "She doesn't understand what you two are. Maybe the poison isn't the proximity. Maybe it's the resistance. Maybe she's sick because she's fighting the connection instead of accepting it." Sylas stood up. He towered over Benny, a monolith of scarred muscle and regret. "I cannot take the risk," Sylas said. "If I kill her, I will break this world in half. I will leave nothing but dust." "You're doing a good job of breaking her heart right now," Benny muttered. Sylas flinched. He turned away, punching the metal locker. The door crumpled inward. "Get out." Then he sighed and left. Sylas remained, staring at the dented metal, feeling the ghost of her touch on his skin, an itch he couldn't scratch. Chapter 17, The Siege. The attack didn't come with a declaration of war. It came with a streak of white light that turned the night sky into noon. Elsa was dozing fitfully when the siren screamed. It wasn't the rhythmic wail of the perimeter alarm. It was the continuous, flat-lined shriek of the air raid warning. "Incoming!" Benny's voice tore through the comms system. "Orbital trajectory!" Elsa threw off the blankets. The cold vanished, replaced by a surge of pure adrenaline. She grabbed her boots, jamming her feet into them. Sylas. She didn't run for the bunker. She ran for the command deck. If they were under orbital siege, she needed to coordinate the shield generators. She sprinted through the corridors. The spire shook violently, knocking her into the wall. Dust rained from the ceiling. "Shields up!" she screamed into her comm, though she wasn't sure anyone was listening. "Divert all power to the upper dome!" She burst onto the command deck. The panoramic windows showed a nightmare. High above the wasteland, a city satellite was raining fire. Beams of kinetic energy slammed into the spire's energy fields, creating ripples of blue sparks that lit up the desert for miles. "The generator is overheating!" a technician yelled, his face pale. "Hold it!" Elsa commanded, grabbing the console. "If that shield drops, we're vaporized!" Below, in the barracks, Sylas was moving against the tide of fleeing refugees. He was heading up.
"Elsa!"
he roared, shoving aside a crate of munitions that had fallen in the hallway. He felt her terror through the muted bond, a sharp, jagged spike that pierced his apathy. "Sylas, stay down." Elsa's voice crackled in his ear. "The command deck is the target." "I am coming," he shouted back. No. Elsa watched the shield integrity meter drop. 15%, 10%. Get to the supports. Hold the foundation. If the spire collapses, everyone dies. Sylas stopped. She was right. He was the only one strong enough to physically brace the structural pillars if the integrity failed. He punched the wall in frustration, then turned and ran for the foundation levels. On the command deck, Elsa watched the sky split open. The satellite fired a main round, a bunker buster. "Brace!" she screamed. The beam hit the shield. The generator exploded. The glass of the observation deck shattered inward. Elsa was thrown backward. She saw the ceiling coming down, tons of reinforced concrete and steel. She raised her hands, instinctively trying to catch it with her mind, but there was nothing there. No power, no conduit. The roof collapsed. Darkness swallowed her whole. Chapter 18. Buried Silence. Thick, heavy silence smelling of pulverized concrete and copper wiring. Elsa couldn't move. She was pinned. A heavy steel beam lay across her hips, trapping her legs. Above her, a slab of concrete formed a precarious tent, leaving her in a pocket of air no bigger than a coffin. She coughed, the dust coating her throat. Pain radiated from her legs, hot and sharp. "Benny?" She rasped. Her combead was dead. She reached up, her fingers brushing the rough stone inches from her face. She was buried. Alive. Panic, cold and primal, clawed at her throat. She started to hyperventilate. "Don't panic. Panic uses oxygen." "Sylas," she whispered. She closed her eyes and reached for the bond. She didn't care about the burnout. She didn't care about the lobotomy. She just wanted him to know she was alive. She found static. The bond was there, but it was buried under layers of pain and interference. "I'm here," she thought, projecting the words with every ounce of will she had. "I'm here." 10 levels down, Sylas Vane stopped holding up a collapsing ceiling beam. He handed the weight off to 3 other alphas and bolted. He didn't run. He hunted. He moved through the ruined corridors of the spire, sniffing the air. He could smell the smoke, the ozone, the blood, but under it all, he smelled her. Copper and rain. He reached the stairwell to the command deck. It was gone, replaced by a mountain of rubble. "Elsa!" he roared. The sound was so loud it shook dust from the twisted rebar. No answer. He threw himself at the pile. He grabbed a chunk of concrete the size of a car and hurled it aside. He didn't use telekinesis. His mind was too chaotic. He used his hands. He dug. He tore at the jagged metal with his bare fingers. He ripped steel cables that snapped like thread.
I am coming!
He screamed, his voice breaking.
Elsa, breathe! Just breathe!
His hands were bleeding. His fingernails tore. He didn't feel it. He was a machine of desperation. He could feel her heartbeat, faint, fluttering like a trapped bird. It was slowing down.
No!
He went feral. The violet light exploded from him, not in a controlled beam, but in a shock wave. He blasted the smaller debris away, vaporizing the dust. He saw a glint of yellow plastic. The mop bucket. It was crushed, flattened under a slab. Elsa was underneath that slab. Sylas fell to his knees, shoving his hands under the massive piece of concrete. It weighed 20 tons. He groaned, the veins in his neck bulging, his muscles tearing with the effort.
Up!
He commanded himself. Slowly, agonizingly, the slab began to rise. Chapter 19. The Spark. Elsa saw the light first, a sliver of violet cutting through the dark. Then she heard the sound, a guttural roar of pure exertion. The weight above her shifted. The slab lifted, inch by inch, grinding against the stone.
Elsa!
Sylas! She gasped. He held the slab up with one hand, his shoulder shaking, blood streaming down his arm, and reached for her with the other. "Take my hand." She reached up. Her fingers brushed his. The moment skin touched skin, the world turned white. It wasn't pain. It wasn't the burning poison she had feared. It was a flood, a dam breaking. The energy that had been building up in Sylas, The rage, the fear, the raw power surged into her. But instead of blocking it, instead of trying to dampen it to save herself, Elsa realized Dr. Wells had been wrong. Benny had been right. She wasn't a dam. She was a conduit. Dams broke under pressure. Conduits let it flow. "Don't hold it," a voice in her head whispered. "Let it go." Elsa gasped, her back arching. Her eyes flew open, glowing with a blinding white light. She didn't absorb the energy, she channeled it. She took Sylas's power, amplified it, and redirected it. "Move," she commanded. She threw her hands up. A blast of pure kinetic force erupted from her palms. It didn't just lift the rubble, it disintegrated it. The 20-ton slab was blasted into dust. The steel beams were bent back like pipe cleaners. The debris covering the command deck was blown outward in a massive violet ring of force. Sylas was thrown back, shielding his eyes. When the dust settled, Elsa was standing. She wasn't pinned anymore. The beam that had trapped her legs was twisted aside. She stood in the center of the crater, glowing. The veins on her neck weren't angry purple. They were shimmering gold. Sylas scrambled to his feet, ignoring his bleeding hands. He rushed to her.
Elsa!
He grabbed her face. She didn't burn. She felt warm, vibrating with life.
"You're not hurt."
He stammered, checking her over frantically.
"The bond."
"It didn't kill you." "I was trying to stop the flow," she breathed, looking at her hands. "I was trying to protect myself from you. But I can't protect myself from you, Sylas. You are the battery. I am the wire. We only burn if the circuit is broken." He stared at her, all replacing the terror in his eyes. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her dusty hair. "I thought I lost you," he sobbed, his body shaking. "I thought I buried you." "You dug me out," she whispered, wrapping her arms around his waist, pressing her face into the ruined tactical vest. "You always dig me out." Chapter 20. The Vow. They sat in the ruins of the command deck, watching the smoke rise from the spire. The attack was over. Kaelen had made his point. Elsa sat between Sylas's legs, her back against his chest, his arms wrapped tight around her. She was bandaging his hands with strips torn from her shirt. "The doctor was wrong," Elsa said quietly. "Separation doesn't save us. It weakens us." "I was afraid," Sylas admitted. He looked at the horizon, where the city of Orym glowed like a distant malignant jewel. "I am still afraid. Kaelen is right. I am flawed. I feel too much." "Good," Elsa said. She finished tying the knot on his bandage and kissed his knuckles. "Subject 1 doesn't feel. That's why we're going to beat it." "How?" Sylas asked. "It is perfect." "It has no reason to fight," Elsa said. She turned in his arms to face him. Her knee throbbed and her head still ached, but her eyes were clear. The second spark in her iris was hidden, but she could feel it. A tiny flutter of life that survived the collapse. "We have something to fight for," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach. Sylas froze. He looked at her, his eyes widening. He had felt the warmth before, in the rover, but he had been too feral to understand. Now, with the adrenaline fading and the bond flowing clear and golden between them, he finally understood. "Elsa?" His voice was a whisper, fragile as glass. "A pup?" She laughed, a wet, teary sound. "A baby, Sylas, not a puppy." He stared at her stomach, then at her face. The big, terrifying king of the Wasteland looked like he was about to shatter. Tears spilled over his cheeks, cutting tracks through the dust. "You and me?" "You and me," she nodded. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't hungry or desperate. It was reverent. It was a vow sealed in breath and blood. "I will burn the world," he whispered against her lips. "I will burn the city." "I will burn Kaelen. No one touches you. No one touches them." "We don't need to burn the world," Elsa said, pulling back. "We just need to take the city." She stood up, pulling him with her. They stood on the edge of the ruined spire, looking out at the wasteland. Below, the refugees were emerging from the bunkers, looking up at their leaders. "Kaelen attacked us because he's scared," Elsa said, her voice gaining strength. "He knows what happens when a creator loses control of his creation." "What happens?" Sylas asked, stepping up beside her, his hand resting protectively on her lower back. "The creation comes back," Elsa said, her eyes flashing with violet lightning. "And he brings hell with him." "We stay together," Sylas rumbled. "Or we burn together," Elsa finished. She looked at him. "Gather the warlords, Sylas. We're going to war." Chapter 21. The War Council. The Iron Spire was no longer a fortress. It was a tomb with the roof blown off. The morning sun glared down through the massive crater where the command deck used to be, illuminating the twisted rebar like the ribs of a decaying carcass. Elsa Krell stood in the center of the hangar bay, which had been hastily converted into a war room. Her knee throbbed with a dull, persistent rhythm, a reminder of the canyons, but she ignored it, leaning her weight against a heavy munitions crate. She wore a fresh tactical vest Benny had scavenged, pulled tight over her stomach. Around her stood the remnants of their leadership. Benny looked ghostly, his face smeared with soot, tapping nervously on a datapad that was miraculously still functioning. The leader of the Rust Raiders, the man with the metal jaw whom Elsa had spared in Chapter 2, stood with his arms crossed. His name, she had learned, was Jax. And then there was Sylas. He sat on a stack of tires, his massive frame dominating the space. His hands were heavily bandaged, white linen stark against his dark skin, wrapped tight to cover the lacerations from digging her out of the rubble. He wasn't brooding anymore. The chaotic, feral static that had plagued him for days was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying stillness. He watched the room not like a monster, but like a general. "The shield generator is slag," Benny reported, his voice cracking. "The upper 10 levels are structurally unsound. If the wind picks up, the whole North Tower comes down. We can't stay here, Elsa. If Kaelen fires a second shot..." "He won't," Elsa said, her voice steady. "He thinks we're dead. The sensor array was destroyed in the first blast. As far as the city is concerned, the King and Queen of Bone are buried under 20 tons of concrete." "We should let them believe it," Sylas rumbled. He stood up, and the Rust Raiders instinctively took a half step back. "If we are dead, they will lower their guard. They will celebrate." And while they're popping champagne, Elsa pointed to the holographic map Benny had projected onto the floor. "We hit them. We can't defend the spire anymore. We have no roof. We have no shields. Our only defense is offense." Jax, the raider captain, spat on the floor. "You want to attack the city? With what? We have 50 men and 3 working trucks. The city has hunters. They have walls." "We have a king," Elsa said, looking at Sylas. "And we have a queen," Sylas added, meeting her gaze. The connection between them was no longer a heavy, suffocating weight. It was a clear, golden stream. He could feel the tiny second heartbeat inside her, a secret drumbeat that fueled his resolve. "We don't need to breach the walls," Elsa addressed the room. "We're going under them. The sanitation tunnels in Sector 7. I used to scrub them. I know the layout better than the city architects." "The sewer run?" Benny grimaced. "Elsa, those tunnels are flooded. They're full of toxic sludge." "Then we wear masks," Elsa said. "It's the only way in without triggering the perimeter alarms. Once we're inside, we target the power grid. We cut the lights. We create chaos. And while the city is blind, Sylas and I go for the science division." "Subject 1, Sylas said the name like a curse. "It wakes up today. If we wait, Kaelen will deploy it. We must kill it in the cradle." Jax looked at the map, then at Elsa, then at the glowing violet eyes of the monster standing behind her. He sighed, adjusting his metal jaw. "My boys are crazy," Jax said. "But we ain't suicidal. If we march on the city, we need more bodies. We need a distraction big enough to pull the city guard away from the science division." "I know," Elsa nodded. She traced a line on the map, pointing to the jagged ridges of the southern wastes. That's why we're going to make some calls. Benny, fire up the shortwave transmitter. Who are we calling? Benny asked. Elsa smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that felt entirely new. Everyone we didn't kill. Chapter 22, The Alliance. The meeting took place at noon, in the shadow of the ruined spire. It wasn't a diplomatic summit, it was a gathering of sharks. 3 convoys had arrived within the hour, answering the open broadcast Elsa had sent. These were the warlords of the southern wastes, leaders of the gangs that usually tore each other apart for scraps of lithium and water. There was Gravewalker, a woman who wore armor made of human bones. There was Sylas, no relation to the king, much to Sylas's annoyance, a massive brute who led the engine heads. And there was the Viper, a slippery strategist whose convoy consisted entirely of stolen city bikes. They stood in a circle in the dust, weapons drawn, eyeing Sylas with a mixture of greed and terror.
You look like hell, Your Majesty.
The Viper sneered, looking at Sylas's bandaged hands.
Did the city finally clip your claws?
Sylas didn't growl. He didn't posture. He simply stepped forward, the ground trembling slightly under his boots. The city tried to bury us. They failed. Now, we are going to burn them. We are offering you a share of the ash. Why should we fight for you? Gravewalker asked, fingering the hilt of her machete. The city has orbital cannons. You have a pile of rubble. Because the city is building something that will wipe you out. Elsa stepped into the circle. She limped slightly, favoring her bad knee, but her head was high. A synthetic alpha. It doesn't eat, it doesn't sleep, and it doesn't bargain. Once it's done with us, it's coming for you. It will hunt you down in your caves and your canyons until there is nothing left but silence. The warlords exchanged uneasy glances. They had all heard the static. They had all felt the rage signal ripple through their own alphas. If we win, the engine head leader grunted. What do we get? You get the city, Elsa said. Silence descended. The sheer audacity of the offer stunned them. We don't want the territory, Elsa continued. We want Kaelen. We want the lab. Once the board is gone, once the science division is the rest is yours. The warehouses of food, the water purification plants, the batteries, it's all yours. You'd give up the throne? The Viper asked, skeptical. I never wanted a throne, Elsa said softly. I just wanted a home. Bullshit, Gravewalker spat. Nobody gives up power. Watch me, Elsa challenged. She raised her hand. Her eyes flared, not with the old violet lightning, but with a searing white-gold radiance. The air pressure dropped. The loose rocks around the warlords began to float. I am the conduit, she said, her voice amplified by the telekinetic field. I can crush your minds right now. I can turn your convoys into scrap metal. I don't need to bargain. I am letting you join us. She dropped the field. The rocks clattered to the ground. The warlords flinched. Sylas watched her, pride radiating from him like heat. She wasn't hiding behind him anymore. She was standing beside him. Jax, the Rust Raider captain, stepped up.
I'm in. The Queen gave me a life when she could have given me death. That counts for something out here.
Gravewalker looked at Jax, then at Elsa. She sheathed her machete. The Bone Eaters are in.
Engine heads act, the big man grunted.
The Viper sighed, looking at the massive hole in the spire.
If we die, I'm haunting you, Elsa.
Fair enough, Elsa said. Benny, give them a frequency. We move at sundown. Chapter 23, The Calm Before. The night before the march was suffocatingly quiet. The wind had died down, leaving the desert suspended in a breathless stillness. The camp was a sprawling chaos of engines and fires, the combined armies of the Wasteland checking weapons and fueling vehicles. But up on the remnant of the spire's observation deck, a jagged ledge of concrete jutting out over the abyss, Elsa and Sylas were alone. They sat on a blanket, huddled together against the dropping temperature. Elsa leaned back against Sylas's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. His bandages were rough against her skin, but his touch was gentle. "Are you afraid?" Sylas asked quietly. His chin rested on the top of her head. "Terrified," Elsa admitted. She traced the scars on his forearm. "Not of dying. I'm afraid of what we might find in that lab. What if Subject 1 is unstoppable? What if Kaelen was right and you're obsolete?" Sylas finished the thought. He tightened his hold on her. "I thought about that for days. I thought I was broken because I hesitated, because I cared." He moved his hand to her stomach, his palm large and warm over the new life growing there. "But Kaelen forgot something," Sylas rumbled. "A weapon has no reason to survive. It fights because it is told to. I fight because I have something to lose. That makes me dangerous in a way a machine can never be." Elsa turned in his arms, looking up at him. The moonlight softened the harsh angles of his face. He looked tired, yes, but the haunting emptiness was gone. "You're going to be a good father," she whispered. "Terrifying, overbearing, but good." Sylas let out a short, rough laugh. "I will teach them to hunt. I will teach them to break bone." "And I will teach them to read," Elsa countered, poking his chest. "And to say please before they break the bone." "Compromise," Sylas agreed. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a slow, deep kiss. It wasn't the desperate, feverish kiss of the canyons. It was steady. It was the kiss of a man who intended to come back. When they broke apart, Elsa rested her head on his shoulder, looking out at the distant glow of the city. It looked beautiful from here, a shimmering oasis of light. But she knew the rot that lived at its core. "My knee hurts," she murmured. "I can carry you," Sylas offered instantly. "No," she shook her head. "I walk. The army needs to see me walk, but you can hold my hand." "Always," Sylas vowed. They sat there for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead, two broken things holding each other together, waiting for the sun to rise on the end of the world. Chapter 24. Departure. Dawn broke like a bruised plum, purple and swollen on the horizon. The roar of engines shattered the silence. It started as a low rumble and built into a deafening crescendo as hundreds of scavenged vehicles revved their motors. Elsa stood on the hood of the lead truck, Jax's reinforced semi. She wore her long coat, the tactical vest, and a mask hanging around her neck. She looked out at the sea of metal and rust. "Today we take it back!" she shouted, her voice amplified by a megaphone Benny had rigged up. "Today we remind them that the Wasteland isn't empty, it's hungry." A cheer went up, a ragged, savage sound of men and women who had been discarded by the gleaming metropolis on the horizon. Sylas climbed up beside her. He didn't need a megaphone. He just roared. It was a primal alpha challenge that vibrated in the chests of everyone present. It was a signal. The pack is moving. "Mount up," Elsa commanded. She climbed down into the cab. Sylas took the wheel. Benny squeezed into the back, looking pale and clutching a bag of encrypted drives. "This is a terrible idea," Benny muttered as the convoy began to roll. "Statistically, we have a 12% chance of survival." "Never tell me the odds, Benny." Elsa quoted an old movie she'd found on a drive once. "Just tell me where the sewer grate is." The convoy stretched for a mile, a snake of dust and iron winding through the dunes. They didn't take the main road. They cut through the salt flats, moving fast to beat the city's long-range scanners. Inside the truck, the mood was tense. Elsa kept checking her sidearm, sliding the magazine in and out. Sylas drove with one hand, his other hand resting on her knee, squeezing it gently whenever she winced from a bump in the road. "We are close," Sylas said after 2 hours of driving. Ahead, the City of Orym rose from the desert floor, like a mountain of glass and steel. It was surrounded by a massive perimeter wall, topped with turret towers. "The warlords will hit the south gate." Elsa reviewed the plan. "They'll make a lot of noise, draw the main garrison." "And we go north," Sylas said, "to the outflow." They saw the signal flare go up in the south, green smoke billowing into the sky. Moments later, the distant boom of cannons echoed across the flats. The distraction had begun. "That's our cue," Elsa said, her heart hammering against her ribs. Sylas swerved the truck, peeling away from the main convoy. Only one other vehicle followed them, a small, fast buggy carrying Jax and a demolition team. They headed for a jagged cleft in the rocks at the base of the northern wall. The smell hit them before they even saw it, a foul chemical stench of raw sewage and industrial runoff. "Home sweet home," Elsa grimaced, pulling her mask up. Chapter 25. The Sewer Run. The truck ground to a halt 50 yards from the outflow pipe. It was a massive concrete orifice, 3 meters wide, spewing a trickle of neon green sludge into the desert. An iron grate barred the entrance, thick with rust and filth. "Everybody out!" Sylas ordered. They bailed out of the vehicles. The air was acrid, burning the eyes. Jax and his demo team, 2 scrappy-looking kids with packs full of homemade explosives, ran to the grate. "We have to blow it," Jax said. "It's welded shut." "No explosives," Elsa stopped him. "The acoustic sensors will pick up the blast. Sylas?" Sylas stepped forward. He walked into the sludge, the chemical muck sloshing around his boots. He grabbed the iron bars of the grate. His bandages were already staining gray. He didn't grunt, he just pulled. The metal groaned, screeching in protest. Rust flaked off in showers. With a wet snap, the grate tore free from the concrete. Sylas tossed it aside like a piece of cardboard. "After you, Your Majesty," Sylas bowed mockingly to Elsa. "Charming," she muttered. She turned on her flashlight and stepped into the darkness. The tunnel was a nightmare. The walls were slick with algae, and the water was knee-deep in places. Rats the size of cats scurried along the conduit pipes overhead. "Watch your step," Elsa whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the mask. "There are pressure plates in the floor about half a mile in, maintenance sensors." They moved in single file. Sylas took point, his night vision allowing him to see in the pitch black. Elsa followed, with Benny and the demo team bringing up the rear. The tension was palpable. Every drip of water sounded like a footstep. Every squeak of a rat sounded like a loading gun. "Hold," Sylas hissed, raising a fist. They froze. "What is it?" Elsa whispered, reaching out with her mind. She felt nothing. No minds ahead. "Motion," Sylas said. "Something is moving in the water." Ahead of them, the sludge rippled. A shape rose from the muck. It wasn't a soldier, it was a drone, a small amphibious maintenance unit. It hovered, its red sensor eye scanning the tunnel. If it saw them, it would trigger the alarm. "Don't shoot," Elsa warned Jax, who was raising his rifle. "The flash will blind us." She focused. She couldn't blast it. The noise would be too loud. She had to crush it. She reached out, visualizing the drone. She felt the hum of its motor. She wrapped her will around it, channeling the golden energy that now lived in her blood. She squeezed. The drone imploded. No explosion, just the crunch of metal collapsing in on itself. It dropped into the water with a splash. "Nice," Jax whispered. "Keep moving," Elsa said, wiping sweat from her forehead. The use of power didn't hurt anymore, but it was tiring. They trudged on for what felt like hours. Finally, Elsa spotted a familiar junction mark on the wall, a graffiti tag of a blue bird she had painted herself 5 years ago. Here, she pointed to a ladder rung set into the wall, leading up to a sealed manhole cover. "This comes out in the alley behind the waste processing plant in Sector 4, the workers' district." "Are you sure?" Benny asked, looking dubiously at the ladder. "I'm sure," Elsa said. She looked at Sylas. "Once we open this hatch, we are in enemy territory. There is no going back." Sylas checked his weapons, a massive kinetic hammer he had scavenged from the Spire's armory and a heavy pistol on his hip. He looked at her, his violet eyes glowing in the gloom. "Then let's go say hello to the neighbors," he said. He climbed the ladder and placed his hand on the manhole cover. He pushed. A sliver of gray city light cut through the darkness. The sounds of the metropolis, sirens, traffic, the hum of electricity, filtered down. They were in. The war for the city had begun. Chapter 26. The Uprising. The manhole cover slid aside with a grinding screech that sounded deafening in the pristine alleyway. Sylas emerged first, a dark colossus rising from the underworld, his kinetic hammer dripping with sewer sludge. He scanned the alley, clear. He reached down and pulled Elsa up. She took a breath of the city air. It didn't smell like the wastes. It smelled of ozone, recycled jasmine, and sterility. She adjusted her coat, hiding the mud stains as best she could. Sector 4 Plaza is 2 blocks east, Elsa whispered. Benny, how close do you need to get to a terminal? Any public kiosk will do, Benny said, looking nervously at the gleaming white towers that stretched into the sky. But the main feed is hardwired into the central billboard. If we want everyone to see this, we need to hit the junction box at the base of the plaza screen. Then we go to the plaza, Sylas said, racking the slide of his heavy pistol. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. Sector 4 was the industrial heart of Orym, populated by factory workers, Omegas and Betas, who kept the city running while the Alphas lived in luxury above. The streets were crowded, with tired people in gray jumpsuits, heads down, marching to the rhythm of the shift change. When they reached the plaza, it was packed. A massive holographic screen dominated the square, playing a loop of Director Kaelen talking about safety through obedience. Jax, Elsa signaled. Clear the crowd. Jax grinned. He pulled a smoke grenade from his vest and tossed it into the center of the square. It didn't explode, it just hissed, spewing thick white fog. Panic rippled through the workers. They scattered, screaming. Go! Elsa shouted. They sprinted across the open plaza. 2 peacekeeper drones swooped down from the rooftops, sirens wailing. I got him! Jax yelled. He raised a grenade launcher and fired. The first drone exploded in a shower of sparks. The second swerved, its camera locking onto Elsa. Sylas didn't break stride. He hurled his kinetic hammer. The massive weapon spun through the air, smashing the drone out of the sky before returning to his hand with the magnetic thunk.
Benny, the box!
Sylas roared, slamming his back against the base of the giant screen to provide cover. Benny pried the panel open with a screwdriver, his hand shaking. He jammed the encrypted drive into the port. I'm in. Uploading the virus. Bypassing the firewall. Almost there. A squad of city guards in white armor poured into the plaza, rifles raised. Hold them back, Elsa commanded. She stepped out from behind Sylas, her eyes glowing white gold. She thrust her hands forward. A pulse of telekinetic force slammed into the lead guards, knocking them off their feet like bowling pins. Done, Benny yelled. The giant screen flickered. Kaelen's face distorted, dissolving into static. A moment later, a new image appeared. It was Elsa. Not the polished queen, but the scrubber. Her face was dirty, her hair wild, her eyes burning with defiance. Citizens of Orym. Elsa's voice boomed across the plaza, amplified 1,000 times. Look up. The workers stopped running. They looked at the screen. They looked at the small woman standing in the center of the plaza, surrounded by smoke and guards. You think you are safe, the giant Elsa on the screen said. But you are just batteries. Kaelen is building a monster that will replace us all. He doesn't need workers anymore. He needs silence. Elsa raised her pistol in the plaza, pointing it at the sky. But we are not silent. On screen, the pre-recorded Elsa leaned in. The masters are afraid. Show them why. A heavy silence hung over the square. Then a worker in a gray jumpsuit picked up a piece of debris from the destroyed drone. He threw it at a guard. For the Queen! Someone screamed. Chaos erupted. The workers swarmed the guards. It wasn't a battle. It was a tidal wave of repressed rage. It's starting. Sylas grabbed Elsa's arm. We have to move. The chaos is our cover. They ran toward the transit monorail that led to Sector 1, leaving the riots to burn behind them. Chapter 27. The Gates of Science. The monorail ride was short and violent. They had hijacked a maintenance car, Jax blowing the door charges to get them inside. Now, they hurtled toward the spire of the science division, the city blurring past in streaks of neon. Sector 1 is locked down, Benny said, monitoring the city net on his datapad. The riots are spreading to Sectors 3 and 5, but Kaelen has pulled all elite units back to the tower. He knows we're coming. Good, Sylas said. He was checking the charge on his hammer, his face grim. I want him to know. Elsa sat on a tool bench, massaging her knee. It was swollen, throbbing in time with her pulse. She looked at Sylas. Subject 1. Roker said it was a synthetic. What does that mean? It means it is not born, Sylas said, looking out the window at the approaching spire. It is built, flesh woven over steel, nerves made of fiber optics. It will be fast, Elsa, faster than me. But it has no soul, Elsa said, clutching her stomach instinctively. It has no spark. That is why it is dangerous, Sylas replied. It has no hesitation. The train screeched to a halt at the science station. The doors hissed open. They were instantly under fire. A wall of laser fire greeted them. Elite hunters, cybernetic soldiers, were entrenched behind barricades in the station lobby. Cover! Jax yelled, diving behind a pillar. Sylas roared and charged. He didn't use cover. He activated the gravity field on his hammer, swinging it in a wide arc. The air rippled. The barricades, heavy steel slabs, were ripped from the floor and hurled into the hunters. Elsa moved behind him, using his massive frame as a shield. She saw a hunter aiming a rocket launcher from a balcony. Up! She commanded, throwing her hand up. A beam of white telekinetic energy shot from her palm. It grabbed the hunter and threw him into the ceiling. He crumbled, the rocket firing harmlessly into the rafters. Clear! Sylas shouted, smashing the last hunter's head into the floor. They ran through the lobby, past the shattered glass and smoking bodies. The entrance to the science division, a massive set of double doors marked with the biohazard symbol, stood before them. This is it, Elsa said. She felt a chill go down her spine. The bond between her and Sylas was humming, but there was a strange interference in the air here. A low, synthetic thrumming that made her teeth ache. Do you feel that? Sylas asked, stopping, his violet eyes narrowed. The static. Elsa nodded. But it's not a signal, it's a heartbeat. It's him, Sylas said. He is awake. Jax set the charges on the door. Fire in the hole! The doors blew inward, smoke billowed out. Stay close, Sylas ordered, stepping into the smoke. And do not blink. Chapter 28, Subject 1. The Lab of Echoes lived up to its name. It was a vast, cavernous chamber dug deep into the bedrock beneath the tower. The walls were lined with stasis tubes, hundreds of them, most empty or filled with failed, twisted experiments. But in the center of the room, on a raised platform surrounded by machinery, stood Director Kaelen. He was wearing his pristine white coat, looking entirely out of place amidst the industrial horror. He smiled as the smoke cleared, revealing Sylas, Elsa, and their battered team. Right on time, Kaelen said, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. I must say, Subject 0, your persistence is almost admirable. Almost. Where is it? Sylas growled, stepping onto the platform. He tightened his grip on the hammer. You mean, who is it? Kaelen corrected. He pressed a button on a console. Behind him, a massive containment unit hissed. Cryogenic steam poured out, rolling across the floor like dry ice. Heavy clamps disengaged with the sound of gunshots. A figure stepped out of the mist. Elsa gasped. She had expected a robot. A monster of chrome and wire. Subject 1 looked. Human. Almost. He was tall, taller even than Sylas. His skin was pale, perfect and hairless, shining with a faint pearlescent sheen that betrayed its synthetic nature. He was naked, but there was nothing vulnerable about him. His muscles were corded steel under the skin, defined to the point of anatomical impossibility. But it was his eyes that made Elsa's blood run cold. They weren't violet. They weren't brown or blue. They were silver mirrors, reflective, empty. There was no pupil, no iris, just a polished surface that reflected the world back at it without absorbing a thing. "Behold," Kaelen whispered reverently, "the apex." Subject 1 tilted his head. He looked at Sylas. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. "Kill it!" Sylas roared. Sylas lunged. He moved with the speed of a primordial alpha, a blur of motion that no human eye could track. He brought the hammer down in a skull-crushing arc. Subject 1 didn't dodge. He simply raised a hand. Clang! The sound was like a church bell ringing in hell. Subject 1 had caught the hammer. Caught it. With one hand. He didn't even buckle under the weight. Sylas's eyes widened in shock. He pushed, activating the gravity drive, trying to crush the synthetic. Subject 1 didn't struggle, he just squeezed. The head of the kinetic hammer, forged from starship-grade alloy, began to crumple. "Oh no," Benny whispered from the doorway. Subject 1 lashed out with his free hand. It was a simple, efficient punch to the chest. Sylas was launched backward. He flew 50 feet, smashing through a row of glass stasis tubes before hitting the far wall with a sickening crunch. He slid to the floor, gasping, blood already spraying from his mouth. "Sylas!" Elsa screamed. Chapter 29. The Duel. "Fascinating," Kaelen observed, taking notes on a datapad. Zero's reaction time was 0.4 seconds. One's was 0.02. Elsa raised her pistol and fired. She aimed for Kaelen, but Subject 1 was there instantly. He moved like a glitch in the video feed. One moment he was by the tubes, the next he was in front of the director. The bullets pinged off Subject 1's chest, leaving only small, silver dents that healed in seconds. Nanites. "Leave the girl," Kaelen ordered. "Finish the prototype." Subject 1 turned back to Sylas. Sylas dragged himself up. His chest plate was caved in. He spat a mouthful of blood and violet sparks. He looked at Elsa, his eyes wide with a warning, "Run." Elsa didn't run. She reached for the bond. She pushed white gold energy into Sylas, trying to heal him, trying to boost him. "Up," she commanded. Sylas roared, energized by her power. He grabbed a heavy stasis pod and hurled it at the synthetic. Subject 1 swatted it aside like a fly. They collided in the center of the room. It wasn't a fight, it was an execution. Sylas fought with rage, with desperation. He landed a hook that would have decapitated a normal man. Subject 1's head snapped back, but he just realigned his neck with a crack and countered. He grabbed Sylas by the throat and slammed him into the floor. The concrete shattered. Subject 1 began the punch. Thud. 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 Every blow shook the room. Sylas was losing. He couldn't block. He couldn't counter. The synthetic was too fast, too strong, and utterly tireless. "Stop it!" Elsa screamed. She focused all her power on the synthetic. She tried to grab his mind. "Kneel," she commanded, her voice echoing with psychic power. Subject 1 paused. He looked at her with those mirror eyes. Nothing happened. He didn't kneel. He didn't even flinch. There was no mind to grab, no synapses to misfire. He was a closed loop. "He can't hear you, my dear," Kaelen laughed, a cold, triumphant sound. "He has no ears for your little tricks. He is pure biology and code." Subject 1 turned back to Sylas. He lifted the king of the Wasteland over his head. Sylas was limp, his breathing ragged. Subject 1 walked toward the edge of the platform, where a deep ventilation shaft dropped into the darkness. "No," Elsa whispered. She looked at her hands. Her power was useless against him. Her gun was useless. She looked at Sylas. He met her gaze through his swollen eyelids. He wasn't afraid. He was saying goodbye. "I will burn the universe to keep them safe." Elsa looked around the lab wildly. She saw the massive power conduits running along the ceiling, thick cables pulsating with the energy required to keep the facility running, cables that fed directly into the city's main reactor grid. She remembered the doctor's words. "You are overconducting." She remembered Benny's words. "You're not a dam. You're a wire." She looked at the synthetic. He was a machine. Machines ran on power, and machines could short-circuit. Chapter 30. the Conduit's choice. Elsa didn't run toward Sylas. She ran toward the wall. "Jax!" she screamed. "Blow the panel!" Jax didn't ask questions. He raised his grenade launcher and fired at the main junction box on the wall. The panel exploded, exposing a nest of thick, sparking copper cables the size of pythons.
What are you doing?
Kaelen shouted, his composure finally cracking.
That's the main line. You'll kill us all.
Elsa ignored him. She holstered her pistol. She looked at the cables. They were buzzing with lethal voltage. Touching them meant death, unless you were a conduit. "Sylas!" she yelled. "Let him go!" Sylas, hanging in the synthetic's grip, summoned the last of his strength. He didn't try to break free. He kicked Subject 1 in the knee, shattering the joint mechanism. The synthetic stumbled, dropping Sylas. "Now!" Sylas rolled away. Elsa grabbed the cables with both hands. Pain, infinite white-hot pain. It wasn't like the bond. This was raw, unfiltered electricity. It felt like her blood was boiling. It felt like her bones were turning to glass. She screamed, her head thrown back, her eyes glowing so bright they were blinding. Her body arched, becoming a living bridge between the city's grid and the room. She didn't absorb it. She didn't try to hold it. She aimed it. She thrust her hands towards Subject 1. "Burn!" A bolt of lightning, thick as a tree trunk and violet white, erupted from her chest. It crossed the room in an instant. It hit Subject 1 square in the chest. The synthetic flew backward, his perfect skin blistering instantly. He crashed into the console, but the lightning didn't stop. Elsa kept pouring it on. She channeled the lights of the monorail, the billboards of the plaza, the neon of the towers. She drained the city of Orym dry. Subject 1 convulsed, his mirror eyes shattered, his synthetic nerves fused. He opened his mouth to scream, but only static came out.
"Elsa, stop!"
Benny yelled, shielding his eyes. "You're going to burn out." She couldn't stop. The power was rushing through her like a river. She felt the darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. She felt the baby's heartbeat, fast and terrified, for them. She gave one final push. Subject 1 exploded. It wasn't a fiery explosion. It was a biological vaporization. The energy overloaded his cells and he simply disintegrated into a cloud of ash and ozone. The lightning arc died. Elsa stood there for a second, smoke rising from her coat, her hands blackened. Then, her knees buckled, she fell. The lights in the lab, and in the entire city above, went out. Chapter 31. The Snake in the Dark. The darkness in the lab of echoes was absolute. The blackout had killed the overhead fluorescence, the containment fields, and the humming ventilation. The silence that followed the vaporization of Subject 1 was heavy, broken only by the ragged, wet sound of Sylas breathing through a crushed chest. "Elsa." Benny's voice trembled from the doorway, a small sound in the vast, tomb-like room. "Elsa." "Stay back," Sylas rasped. He was on his knees beside Elsa's prone form. He couldn't see her, but he could smell the ozone and the terrifying scent of charred flesh coming from her hands. He placed a hand gently on her neck, a pulse. Weak, erratic, but there. "She is alive," Sylas said, the relief nearly buckling him. "Benny, get the med kit, now." Click. A tactical light blinded them. It came from the far side of the room, near the emergency exit. The beam cut through the smoke, pinning Sylas and Elsa in a circle of harsh white illumination. "Don't move." Director Kaelen's voice floated from behind the light. It wasn't the arrogant, smooth voice of the scientist anymore. It was tight, high-pitched, and dangerous. "I have a heavy particle pistol aimed at her head. Even a broken monster can't move faster than light." Sylas shielded Elsa with his body, his back to the light. His ribs groaned and shifted with every movement, sending spikes of agony through his torso. He snarled, a low, rumbling warning. "You destroyed my life's work," Kaelen spat. "Billions of credits, years of genetic tailoring, gone." "It was a doll," Sylas growled. "I broke your doll." "It was perfection!" Kaelen screamed, the light shaking as his hand trembled. "And now I have to salvage the source material. I can't let you leave, Sylas. I need your DNA to start over." Jax, Sylas whispered, barely moving his lips. Location. From the doorway, hidden in the shadows where the light didn't reach, Jax was moving. The Demel expert didn't have night vision, but he had ears. 3 o'clock, Jax whispered over the comms. 30 meters, near the stasis tanks. I'm going to shoot her first, Kaelen threatened, stepping closer. Unless you stand up, Subject Zero. Stand up and walk to the containment cell. Do it, or the conduit dies. Sylas slowly rose to his feet. He swayed, the pain in his chest blinding. He held his hands up, showing his empty palms. I am standing, Sylas said. I am walking. He took a step toward the light. Good, Kaelen said. Good dog. Sylas took another step. He focused on the light. He focused on the smell of Kaelen's fear, sweat, cheap cologne, and adrenaline. Benny, Sylas said conversationally. Kill the light. Benny didn't hesitate. He hurled his datapad, heavy, military-grade ruggedized plastic, through the dark. It wasn't a precision weapon, but Benny had played shortstop in the refugee leagues. The datapad smashed into Kaelen's hand. The flashlight spun away, clattering across the floor, the beam spinning wildly before settling on a wall. For a second, there was darkness again. And in the darkness, the monster didn't need eyes. Sylas moved. He ignored the broken ribs. He ignored the exhaustion. He launched himself across the gap. Kaelen fired blindly. The particle bolt sizzled through the air, scorching Sylas's shoulder, but it didn't stop him. Sylas hit Kaelen with the force of a freight train. They crashed into the console, glass shattering. Kaelen shrieked, a thin, pathetic sound as Sylas's hand, huge, bloodied, and unforgiving, closed around his throat. Chapter 32. The Judgment. Sylas lifted the director off the floor and slammed him against the wall. He didn't let go. He pinned him there, feet dangling 6 inches off the ground. Benny scrambled to pick up the flashlight, training it on them. The beam illuminated Kaelen's face, purple, eyes bulging, glasses cracked. Please! Kaelen choked out, his hand scrabbling uselessly at Sylas's wrist. I can fix her! Sylas paused. His grip didn't loosen, but he didn't snap the neck yet. What? Sylas rumbled. The burns! Kaelen wheezed. Neural damage. The city has tanks. Regeneration tanks. Only I have the codes. Kill me, and she stays broken. It was the oldest lie in the book, the villain's last bargain. Sylas looked back at Elsa. Jax was kneeling beside her, applying burn gel from a field kit. She was pale, deathly still. Sylas looked back at Kaelen. He saw the gleam of calculation in the director's eyes. Kaelen wasn't sorry. He was planning his next move. He thought Sylas was still the prototype, the creature that could be manipulated with promises of safety. You think I am stupid, Sylas said softly. No, Kaelen gasped. I am offering a trade, a life for a life. You don't have the codes, Sylas said, leaning in close. His violet eyes were dull, exhausted, but utterly resolved. You are just a man in a lab coat. You didn't build me, Kaelen. You just tortured me until I became strong enough to break you. I am your creator, Kaelen shrieked, spittle flying. Without me, you are nothing but a wild animal. A king, Sylas corrected, does not bargain with his food. He didn't scream. He didn't make a speech. He simply tightened his grip. There was a wet, sickening crunch. Kaelen went limp. The light in his eyes faded, replaced by the same emptiness he had tried to install in Subject 1. Sylas opened his hand. The body crumpled to the floor like a discard pile of laundry. Sylas stared at it for a moment. He felt no satisfaction, no joy, just a grim finality. The nightmare of the lab was over. The ghost that had haunted his sleep was just meat. Is he dead? Benny asked, his voice shaking. He is obsolete, Sylas said. He turned his back on the corpse and walked to Elsa. He fell to his knees beside her, ignoring the agony in his own body. He looked at her charred hands, the hands that had held lightning for him. "We are leaving," Sylas said, scooping her up into his arms. She was light, too light, her head lolled against his bruised chest. "Sylas, your ribs," Jax warned. "Let me help." "No," Sylas said. He stood up, teeth gritted, sweat beading on his forehead. "I carried her in, I carry her out." Chapter 33, The Dawn. The elevator ride up to the surface felt like an eternity. The emergency lights flickered red, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Sylas held Elsa tight, listening to the shallow rhythm of her breathing. "Hold on," he projected the thought, hoping she could hear him through the silence of the bond. "The sun is coming." When the doors opened onto the plaza, they were greeted by noise. The riots had stopped, but the city was not quiet. The plaza was filled with thousands of people, workers, warlords, scrappers. The fires were still burning, casting a chaotic orange glow against the dawn sky. When Sylas stepped out, carrying the unconscious queen, a hush fell over the crowd closest to the tower. It rippled outward like a wave until the entire square was silent. They saw the monster. They saw the blood on his chest, the burns on his skin, and the woman in his arms. "Is she dead?" someone whispered. Sylas walked to the edge of the stairs. He looked out at the sea of faces. He saw the warlords, Gravewalker and the Viper, standing by their trucks, covered in soot, looking up at him with newfound respect. "The director is dead," Sylas roared. His voice cracked, but it carried. "The synthetic is dust."
"You are free!"
A roar went up, a sound of catharsis that shook the glass towers. It was a victory cry, but Sylas felt none of it. He just wanted a doctor.
"Medic!"
Benny screamed, pushing past Sylas.
"We need a medic, now!"
A city transport vehicle, sleek, white, and marked with a medical cross, pushed through the crowd. It wasn't driving aggressively. The people parted for it. The back doors opened. Dr. Wells, the defector from the Spire, jumped out. She had come with the second wave of the convoy. "Put her down," Wells ordered, gesturing to the gurney. Sylas hesitated. The instinct to keep her close, to guard her, was overwhelming.
Sylas.
Benny put a hand on his arm.
Let them work. You did your job. You got her out.
Sylas slowly lowered Elsa onto the stretcher. He kept his hand on her ankle as the medic swarmed her, checking vitals, cutting away the burnt sleeves of her coat. "Heart rate is 30, Wells barked. "Severe electrical burns on the hands and forearms. Possible cardiac arrhythmia. We need to intubate. Get her to the trauma center."
"I am coming,"
Sylas said.
"You need a stretcher too, big guy."
Wells looked at his chest. "You're breathing on one lung."
"I walk,"
Sylas said. He took a step and stumbled. Jax caught him.
"Yeah, you walk,"
Jax said, supporting the massive king.
"Lean on me, boss. We got you."
As they loaded Elsa into the transport, the sun finally broke over the horizon. It illuminated the smoke rising from the science division, the shattered glass of the plaza, and the strange, hopeful faces of the people. The long night of the Iron Spire was over. The day of the Bone Kingdom had begun. Chapter 34, The Recovery. The trauma center in Sector 1 was pristine, a stark contrast to the rust and grime of the Spire's infirmary. But to Sylas, it was just another cage. He sat in a chair beside Elsa's bio-bed, refusing to leave even after the doctors had set his ribs and drained the fluid from his lungs. He was clean now. Someone had forced him into a shower and given him scrubbing salts to get the blood off, but he still felt dirty. Elsa lay suspended in a gel matrix field. Her hands were wrapped in regenerative bandages that glowed with soft blue light. She had been unconscious for 3 days. "Talk to me," Sylas whispered, leaning his forehead against the barrier of the field. "Yell at me. Tell me I'm too loud. Just wake up." The door swished open. Benny walked in, looking tired but clean. He was holding a data pad. "The city council surrendered an hour ago," Benny said quietly. "Or, well, the janitors who took over the council chambers surrendered. We're in charge, Sylas. The warlords are looting the warehouses, but they're following the rules. Mostly." Sylas didn't look up. "Does she know?" "Does she know we won?" Benny asked. "No, she's been in a coma, Sylas." "No," Sylas looked at the monitor displaying her brain activity. Does she know I am here? She knows, Benny said. Even when the bond is quiet, she knows. A spike appeared on the monitor, a small, sharp jump in the alpha waves. Sylas stood up. Elsa? Her eyelids fluttered. A low groan escaped her lips. The gel matrix field hissed as it lowered, sensing the patient was waking. Her eyes opened. They were foggy, the pupils dilated. She blinked, trying to focus on the ceiling. Sylas? Her voice was a wreck, barely a whisper. I am here. He grabbed her shoulder, carefully avoiding the burns. I am right here. She turned her head. She saw him. She saw the bandages on his chest. She saw the fear in his eyes. We won? She rasped. We won, Sylas promised. Kaelen is dead. The city is yours. She tried to move her hand to touch him, but stopped when she saw the bandages. She flinched, remembering the pain. My hands. They will heal, Sylas said quickly. The doctor said the nerves are regenerating. You will have scars, but you will have hands. She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for days. Then her eyes widened. Her hand, the bandaged one, drifted down to her stomach. The baby, she whispered, terror filling her voice. The surge, the electricity. Sylas froze. He looked at Benny. Benny looked at the floor. The doctors, Sylas started, his voice thick. They prioritized your heart. They didn't check, Elsa finished. Tears welled in her eyes. Check now, please. Chapter 35, The Secret. 1 week later, the Iron Spire was still a ruin, but the lower levels were alive. The refugees had returned, bolstered by thousands of city citizens who preferred the open sky to the cramped sectors. Construction crews were already clearing the rubble of the command deck. In the infirmary, repaired and restocked with stolen city tech, Elsa sat on the edge of the biobed. She wore a loose tunic, her arms heavily bandaged from fingertips to elbows. She looked tired, pale, but she was sitting up. Sylas paced the room. He was wearing a new vest, the symbol of the spire, a stylized tower painted on the back. He looked like a caged tiger. Why is it taking so long? Sylas growled. Dr. Wells sighed, adjusting the resolution on the portable ultrasound scanner. Because, Your Majesty, alpha physiology interferes with standard sonic imaging. Your offspring is essentially a walking EMP field. I have to calibrate. Elsa watched the screen. Her heart was hammering so hard she felt sick. She reached out with the bond, trying to sense the second spark, but her own energy was still too chaotic, too frazzled from the burnout. There, Wells said. A grainy black and white image appeared on the screen. It was small, a peanut-shaped blur. But in the center of the blur, there was a rhythmic, pulsing light. Thump, 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 thump. Elsa let out a sob, covering her mouth with her bandaged hand. Sylas stopped pacing. The big, bad primordial alpha, the killer of Kaelen, the breaker of worlds, froze. He fell to his knees beside the bed, his eyes locked on the screen. It lives? He whispered. It lives, Wells smiled, wiping a tear from her own eye. Strong heartbeat, incredibly strong. I've never seen energy readings like this in a fetus. It's feeding off the ambient static. Sylas reached out, trembling. He placed his large hand over Elsa's stomach. A pup, he said, his voice cracking. Tears spilled over his cheeks, unashamed. A prince, Elsa laughed through her tears, leaning her forehead against his. Or a princess, but definitely a troublemaker. I will burn the universe to keep them safe, Sylas vowed, pressing his face into her lap. No burning, Elsa whispered, stroking his hair with the tips of her bandaged fingers. We're done burning things, Sylas. Now, we build. Sylas looked up at her. The violet light in his eyes was soft, steady, and filled with a love that terrified him. Sit, Sylas, she whispered, the old command now a gentle invitation. And for the rest of his life, he stayed right there. The end.